Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the HerStory TV and the HerStory Podcast. This is Gertrude Macha here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating woman. Welcome to our tribe. Before I start, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea, and community. We pay our respects to their elders, past, present, and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people today. So this is a traditional acknowledgement of country. For those of you who know me, I'm normally based in Wellington, New Zealand. I've recently relocated to Melbourne, Australia. And I feel really privileged to be on this land, sharing these amazing stories with all of you every single day, of powerful women, inspiring women who are changing the world through sharing their stories, one woman at a time, one story at a time. So, my next guest, please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, how old you are, and share your story with us today.
My name is Jill Tietjen. I'm in Centennial, Colorado in the US. That's in the Denver metropolitan area. I'm 67 years old. And I guess my story really starts when I was growing up. My father was an engineer, and I'm the oldest of 4 children. We were expected to go to college, and I grew up in Virginia in the US, and I was expected to go to an in-state school, because there were 4 of us and Dad was a federal government employee, so his resources were limited. And I wanted to attend the University of Virginia. I'm very fortunate that the University of Virginia was actually sued by a young woman who couldn't go to college there in 1969. And in 1970, the University of Virginia admitted its first class of women as undergraduate students. I entered the University of Virginia as a mathematics major. I do have some of those abilities that I inherited from my parents. And partway through my first semester, I realized that I was in the wrong place. I wasn't a mathematics major. I needed to be an engineering major. And so I transferred to the engineering school. But this is the 3rd year. I'm in the 3rd year that women were admitted. I entered in the fall of 1972. And there were 7 women in my class out of 220. And I thought there weren't very many women in engineering at the University of Virginia because there weren't very many women at the University of Virginia. And I didn't know until after I graduated that there weren't very many women in engineering as a field at all. I was very fortunate to find the Society of Women Engineers in 1979, which I joined. And I became very active in that organization when I moved from North Carolina to Colorado in 1981. And a pivotal moment happened in my life in 1987 when my very dear friend Alexis Swoboda went to the Society of Women Engineers National Conference, came back to Denver and said, "Jill, I heard about this program. I think we should implement it in Colorado. And it's an essay contest on great women in engineering and science." And I said to Alexis, as I always said to her, "Alexis, that is a great idea." And then I said, "Who are they?" Because in 1987, I knew one historical woman in engineering or science anywhere in the world, and that was Madame Marie Curie. We had to do the research, and this is 1987, 1988, going to the library, using books. The internet didn't exist then. We decided we were going to do an essay contest for all of the 6th grade students in Colorado and the neighboring state of Wyoming. And of course, at this point in time, we have to send out flyers with names of women. And so we did. And then in the fall of 1988, I was elected to the national board of the Society of Women Engineers. And at the first meeting, the president held up nomination forms for the National Medal of Science and the National Medal of Technology. the U.S. equivalent of the Nobel Prize, awarded by the President of the United States. And she asked for someone willing to do nominations. 17 women in that room, and no one raised her hand. So I did. And in the fall of 1991, I successfully nominated my first woman for the National Medal of Technology. Her name is Admiral Grace Murray Hopper, and she developed the computer compiler. That's the software that allows us humans to use human languages to talk to computers instead of the zeros and ones that computers understand. I was at the White House Rose Garden at Admiral Hopper's request to accept her National Medal of Technology. And as I looked around and looked at the list of recipients, I saw that they were all men except Admiral Hopper. And I thought to myself, this is 1991. How can that be? And I started developing nominations, looking at awards, becoming very active in nominating people. And then my dear friend Alexis found the National Women's Hall of Fame, based in Seneca Falls, New York, the birthplace of women's rights. And we looked at the women who had been inducted, and we said, there's a dearth. There are a lot of the scientific and technical women who are missing. And we made it our mission to nominate women to the hall. Admiral Hopper was my first successful nomination. That was in 1994. And the family asked me to receive that medal at the National Women's Hall of Fame. So now I was hooked, doing all of these nominations, making sure that these women, either alive or not with us anymore, received recognition. And around the same time in 1995, I was forwarded a letter from the Society of Women Engineers headquarters from a woman named Betty Reynolds. And she said, I'm writing this book on an overview of the women's rights movement in the US and women's entry into the non-traditional professions of accounting, engineering, law, and medicine, and I need some information. And I sent her information. She sent me a letter back in 1998, 3 years later, and said, I'm still writing this book. I need some more information. And by the way, I live in the Denver area. You live in the Denver area. Come over and have lunch if you're ever near where I live. And so I did. And the very short story to that is that in the end, 3 books in the Setting the Record Straight series were written. The first was an overview of the women's rights movement. The second was a history of women in engineering. And the third was a history of women in accounting. And then my friend Christy called me one day and said she had met an editor and a publisher from Prentice Hall at a restaurant the night before. They wanted her to write a book, and she wanted to have lunch. She wanted the 2 of us to go have lunch with them. And we did. And that was the Keys to Engineering Success book. And then in 2002, I met a woman whose name was also Jill. And after we had lunch, she said, I want you to meet my friend Charlotte. Charlotte Waisman and I had lunch in February of 2003. And at the end of lunch, Charlotte said, we're going to write a book together. And that's a book that writes women into history. It's called HerStory, a timeline of the women who changed America. More than 850 women in U.S. history from 1587 to 2011. I didn't know women weren't written into history. And that's now become my life mission, to ensure that women are valued, to ensure that women are written into history. So HerStory, a timeline of the women who changed America, was published in hardback in 2008 and in paperback in 2013. And then I was having, and in the interim, I wrote a couple of other books. And in 2016, I was having breakfast with a friend of mine named Barbara Bridges. And she said, well, what are you working on, Jill? And I told her. And she said, I think if you're going to write another book in the HerStory series, that it should be about women in the movies. Barbara is the founder of the Women Plus Film Festival in Denver. She's very active in ensuring that women's stories are told through filmmaking. And so the very short story to that one is in 2019, Hollywood HerStory, An Illustrated History of Women in the Movies, was published. Now, in 2015, I spoke at the University of Colorado Health Sciences Center about the women in history through HerStory. The first HerStory is what I call it. And afterwards, a man came up to me and bought a copy of the book. And he said to me, well, what are you thinking about next? And I actually said, I'm thinking about HerStory Tanzania, part of the HerStory Africa series. And he said, I'm from Tanzania. We're one Africa. You should write a book on women from all of Africa, and I will help you. And his name is Lamek Mbise. And Lamek and I have worked together now since November of 2015. I went to Tanzania in 2017. I did some hands-on work with science, technology, engineering, and math teachers through a nonprofit organization that Lamek founded and for which I chair the board, called Funzilio, which is to get STEM education into the hands of African teachers so that systemic change can be enacted. And while we were in Tanzania, we actually also visited a number of women to ask them what they thought about this concept of the HerStory Africa series and potentially HerStory Tanzania as the first pilot in that series, and they were very enthusiastic. HerStory Tanzania was drafted and provided to teachers in Tanzania, in Arusha, in 2018. Funzilio also works in Zambia, and HerStory Zambia was actually in draft form provided to teachers in Zambia in 2019. In 2020, I actually got under contract to a publisher, Zion Pearl Publishers, in Nairobi, Kenya, to do the volume that's HerStory Kenya, which is now drafted and in book design. And then during the pandemic, one of my friends said to me, you should write a book on how women overcome obstacles in their lives. And on May 3rd, 2022, Over, Under, Around, and Through, How Hall of Famers Surmount Obstacles will be released by Fulcrum Press. And what I do now, and what I learned in writing the first HerStory, is that I tell women's stories. I demonstrate the value of women. I talk about their accomplishments. I've spoken probably more than 600 times now about women and their accomplishments. I write women into history. Women aren't in the history textbooks. Their stories are not told. And I believe that when we tell women's stories, when we write women into history, we demonstrate the value of women. And when we demonstrate the value of women, society is better for everyone.
Wow. Jill, when I saw your profile, I felt like I was looking at a sister from another mother. You and I have lived very, very, very parallel lives. When you said, I'm not sure where this interview is going, but I feel there's something else there. This is the reason why the HerStory movement exists. I grew up in Zimbabwe. Like you, was fortunate enough to go into tech. So I was born to two amazing parents who realized that if they educated their kids, we would get out of poverty. So my father got a scholarship when he was 27 to go and study in London. He became a chartered accountant, took his young wife. My mother became a nurse. And they came back to Rhodesia before Zimbabwe had independence, tried to bring up 5 children on just my mother's salary because my dad couldn't get a white-collar job because he was Black before independence. But when I turned 15, 16, my father would put us on a bus every school holiday and send us to the city and apply for jobs but not take them. He forced us to practice to stand in front of white people and speak. He would say, the corporate world is white. You need to build your confidence. So while my friends were having fun during school holidays, my sister and I were bussed to the city to apply for jobs that we didn't take. And the year my father lost his job, I was 17, one more year to finish high school. The bank was about to repossess our home. And I had come back with 4 job offers that holiday. I could have been a nurse, a pilot, an air traffic controller, or a COBOL programmer. Now, I had decided I will fly out of Africa if it meant I would fly the plane myself. Pilot, but I failed the height restriction. You had to be 1.7 meters tall. I was 1.3. I'm a very tiny woman.
I would fail too, just so you know.
And then my dad said there's this thing called a computer. He didn't even know what it was. He said it's a combination of a typewriter and an adding machine. But technology is the way to go. Forget about everything else. And he channeled me to be a first-generation coder. So I programmed computers in Pascal, COBOL, and Fortran back in the day, and it changed the trajectory of my life. So your passion for STEM is my passion for STEM. I have been setting up these women's cooperatives. I collect old computers. I will sit in a village with a group of women who have electricity, show them how to program, show them how to use all kinds of software so they can make money from home. When I worked in the United States, I lived in Albuquerque, and I was working with an organization called Cultivating Coders. And we were teaching Navajo women on the reservations of New Mexico to code. So there's fiber optics in the desert. The only jobs they can get is in the casinos. So Microsoft funded this project. They would get the laptop after they finished the boot camp. So everything you're saying is like music to my heart right now. But the HerStory book series is something I've also been doing. So all of the women who come onto my podcast, their stories are published in a volume with 10 other women. So I've got 10 women in every volume. The sale of these books is the money that I generate for the social impact projects that we've initiated. We have over 200 projects throughout the African continent, Southeast Asia, the Caribbean. So I know you and I were supposed to meet. This is just divine timing. Your work is my work. We're like two sisters on other sides of the world, writing women's stories into history. You're very right. Until we start to value our own stories, nobody else will. And those of us who are privileged enough to have the technology and the means to do it, we need to go out there and curate all of these stories and write women into history. I'm just so excited to have met you this morning.
Well, I wanted to say a couple of things about the things you've said right now. Admiral Hopper was on the committee that developed COBOL.
Are you serious?
Oh, absolutely. And so she is normally credited with being the founder or the mother or the developer of the business computer language COBOL. And I learned to program Fortran from 2 self-study books that my dad brought home when I was 16. And I taught Fortran to myself. And then I used it when I was in college. So truly, our lives are just completely parallel.
It is absolutely crazy. And to know that you've already curated HerStory Tanzania and Kenya
and Zambia.
And Zambia. You were so close to my part of the world there.
Well, I'm working on South Africa right now.
Oh, fantastic.
So I would be happy to do Zimbabwe instead of South Africa next, or whatever comes next, depending on who we can find to publish them. I have a process. I know how to do it. I know how to get the information.
Okay. Oh, this is fantastic. Well, we definitely need to have an offline conversation around this. I am so excited. So if you were to go back to the younger Jill, that young woman who realized that there is something missing in our history, and I need to do something about it. You took action. You didn't doubt yourself. You didn't try and figure out how. You just took the first step. And now you can sit years later and tell us this story. If there is a young woman right now listening to us speaking, she has this burning desire in her heart to do something. And she's fearful. She doesn't have the money. She doesn't have the skills. She doesn't have. What 3 nuggets of wisdom could you give her as her first step?
Well, I think the first thing you have to do is you do have to take the first step. This is like people who want to write a book. What should they do? I tell them the first thing you have to do is you have to start writing. So if she has a dream, she has to take that first step toward that dream. And I'm not going to tell her that everything is going to play out immediately, but I do believe that everything will play out and she will find a way. So first, you have to take the first step. Second, you have to know that you will find a way. And third, keep your eyes and your ears open. You do not know exactly what opportunity looks like and who is going to come your way to help you. But if you have your eyes and your ears, actually, and your heart and your mind open to possibility, it's absolutely amazing how things will come your way. So those are the 3 things that I would recommend.
I love it. Now, if I could take you into the future, I believe time is an illusion. Time is a construct that human beings have put together. So we wake up and get to work at 8 and finish at 5. If I could teleport you into the future, you're now 120 years old. With science, you'll probably live to be that long. And you're sitting in your rocking chair, surrounded by your children, your grandchildren, your dogs, your cats. If you could have a conversation with that older woman, based on how you're living your life right now, what would you say to her? Because she has guided you to get to that point.
I would talk to the older self and I would say, we did it. We wrote women back into history. We put value on women. Society now values women. And our children and grandchildren and their children and their grandchildren are living in a world that is equitable.
I love it. I always tell the young women that I mentor that they are born with all of the knowings. Everything they need is inside them. I normally go into meditation when I'm trying to figure things out, and I have conversations with the future me. And I ask her, what is my next step? And sometimes it will percolate in a little dream, like the dream of my grandmother. And I'm trying to sell fabric to people who don't sew in New Zealand. And she tells me to break it up into small pieces and to turn it into a business. But I do believe as women, we do have all of the answers to our questions. We just have to dig deep, because you are never gifted with a seed inside you that cannot blossom. If you feel that you have an urge to do something, you already have it in you to do it. And all you have to do, like you said, Jill, is take that first step. So my last question for you, Jill, is there anything I should have asked that I missed out?
Oh my goodness. You and I could talk forever. There's just so many commonalities that we have and so many shared interests that we have, and the vision that we have for the future that is shared, that women are valued, that women can get loans, that women can financially support themselves and their families. I mean, this is a dream for the future that I think we can make happen.
Absolutely wonderful. Jill, thank you so much for coming into my life, for clashing the 2 HerStory stories together today. I'm really excited to see what's coming, to see the possibility that is out there. And thank you to everybody who tuned in today. The Her Story movement is like a magnet now. It is attracting some phenomenal women on the planet. And, Jill, every morning when I wake up, I do 10 to 15 interviews a day. You are my third one for today.
Goodness.
I'm always delighted and surprised at what the universe is presenting to me. So thank you for your knowledge. Thank you for curating women's stories. Looking forward to seeing what we're going to do now that we've come together in this magical way. Thank you, everybody. I'll be back again tomorrow with yet another amazing guest. Jill, don't go away. See you tomorrow, and bye for now.